Yeah, and I'd appreciate if you didn't put the Suck It Up Buttercup in the bloopers.
Too late.
Yeah, that's right. You know it, man.
Can and will.
You know it.
And that is where my marriage took a turn for the worse, when I did a blog on how to improve your marriage.
Welcome to the Caffeinated Theology Pastor Talks video series. And today on this episode, we're going to be talking about marriage in the pastor. So welcome to the show here today. I'm your host, Anthony Swada. I'm the pastor at Harvey Baptist Church in Stephenville, Texas. I'm also joined with Brother David Normand, Dr. David Normand, the one and only professor.
Well, good morning. Good morning.
And then I'm also joined by a fellow pastor, friend, and theologian, Sean Wagner. And he is the pastor. Almost doctor. Hey, you brought it up this time. You're
not quite doctor.
I love it, man. I love it. Sean pastors First Baptist Church in Summerville, Georgia. And we're all on the line today to answer questions about how do you juggle ministry and marriage? What does marriage do for your pastorate and all of those type of things? Now, let's start out this discussion. Gentlemen, I've met your wives, and I know that we have all married up. Amen? Amen to that. Amen
Say yes, Sean. Say yes.
Why is Sean laughing? I don't know why Sean is laughing. I'm scared for you.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I know that we've David and I know that you married up, Sean, even if you don't know that yet. We have all married up. You know, one of the things that is huge in my ministry, and I'm assuming in y'all's as well, is that my wife plays a huge part of my ministry, and she's a huge blessing for me in that. She supports me in ministry. She walks with me in there, and so I really want to protect that relationship that I have with her. And so that's a big deal that we have to do as pastors. I also heard in seminary, and you guys probably have heard as well, that you can always get another church, but it's very hard to find another family. And so we want to make sure that we're not neglecting those God-given responsibilities and covenants that we have before him in marriage. So guys, let's open up the first question. How do you protect your marriage from ministry frustrations and ministry situations?
Well, I think it starts with being willing to say no. And I've always found it's a lot easier to say no to something when you know what you're saying yes to, if that makes sense. So you're saying yes to your marriage, which means there are times when you're going to have to say no to others. So I heard from a pastor recently who was talking about his dad, who was also a pastor. And he had said, my dad was never around. We never threw the ball or did anything together, but we understood he was doing ministry. So it was for Jesus, and we were fine with that. And I said, well, if he neglected his duties at home, was he serving God fully? I mean, there's always something that's going to come up. There is going to be funerals and things that are going to interrupt your plans, but your first plan needs to be for that basic family unit. That's your marriage with your wife.
Yeah. So when do you start saying no? I mean, because I've heard stories of guys like even going to a pastoral search committee or something like that, and all of a sudden the discussion turns from what is he going to do as the pastor to what is his wife going to do in the children's ministry. Where does that process of saying no start, and how do you kind of continue that process as you're working through ministry?
Yeah, I think it's difficult, but you've got to lay down early and understand my wife is not being hired by the church. So what should the church expect from her? To be a good church member. I think that's it. What would a good church member at her phase of life do? So in our case, she's a mother. My wife's a mother of 3 young children. So do I expect a church member who's a mother with 3 young children at home to be always at the church, always working, always volunteering? Or do I expect us to say, okay, in this season of life, we're serving you in the nursery and in the children's ministry so that you can have a time to sit in the service? Don't expect more out of your wife than you would out of a church member, a good, faithful coming church member.
So David, I got a question for you, man. You have pastored before, and you have pastored in some churches that were going through some pretty hard transitions, and life wasn't always, peaches and cream as you were walking through your pastorate. How did you protect your marriage from the frustration of ministry and walking through those seasons when people were not necessarily being very nice to you? So how did you make sure that your marriage or that situation didn't bleed into your marriage relationship with Krista?
That's a good question. My wife knew at a young age that she felt called to marry a pastor. She knew at a young age that was part of the deal. In fact, she'll tell you that she knew that I was called to be a pastor before I did. I thought I was just called to music ministry, and she knew better. So in many ways, she's been preparing to support and encourage and back me, and kind of to support and submit herself to the mission to which God's called me for years. And so when it comes to pastoring and in those hard times, she's my first counsel, right? I mean, apart from Christ, apart from Scripture, earthly speaking, she's the first person that I'm going to and I'm sharing things with. I know a lot of guys feel the need to kind of protect their wives and to create this barrier between the church and their wives. And I get it. I understand that. But that's never been my wife and I's relationship. Our relationship has always been very much on the we'll talk about it more than we won't talk about it side, which explains a lot of our personalities and conflicts at times. But so the way that I've kind of protected my marriage in that is by not withholding anything, not holding anything back. And so she has access to as much information as she wants from me. At times I may not be like forthcoming with it in the sense that, hey, guess what so-and-so said? But if she ever asks, I'm never hesitant to say that. And we do a lot of ministry out of our home as well, which involves her and engages her in that regard, which again puts her on the front line.
Sure. So you tell her everything. You're an open book to her.
My philosophy with ministry is the same as my philosophy with my cell phone with my wife. She has the password and she can look into anything she wants to look into.
Wow, that's crazy. And she acts as your filter.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Well, that explains so much.
That filter includes Instagram and Twitter, right?
Well, but she doesn't know.
Oh, mercy. Sean, what about you, man? Do you share everything with your wife, or you guard her?
To a degree. We also have a agreement that, if someone comes to counsel with it, that's personal or private information, we agree that anything can be talked about between us, but also there is that barrier as well. So take, for example, she was nurse at the campus clinic of Southwestern for a couple of years. So she knew things about people there that I don't need to know. In fact, would be illegal for her to tell me. So there is that barrier, if that makes sense. Because she was an RN, I don't need to know the history or the medical stuff behind people on campus just because she knows it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So there is like a confidentiality barrier there.
Oh, yeah. But that's professional. That's the law. She's not permitted to tell me that information.
But even in the pastoral sense, I think it's important to pay attention to those boundaries, because there is an element of confidentiality of what people tell their pastor versus what people are wanting out in the open. As I've been kind of fleshing through this, I think it's really going to depend on your marriage and on the information that's being shared. I mean, there are some things that you can openly talk about with your wife, even if it's difficult. But there are other things that you really need to make sure that you are guarding her from and not tempting her with. So if it's sensitive information, such as like a counseling situation, that may not be something that you need to share with your wife. You probably need to guard her integrity from that. So if somebody does come up to her and say, hey, did pastor tell you this about me? She can honestly look at them in the eyes and say, nah, he didn't say anything about that. And then your integrity is kept, and then her integrity is kept, and that's good, instead of having to lie about that.
And I would say the only caveat to that is, if you're not going to do that, be forthright about it up front. And so that's one of the things that I'll say is I don't have a confidentiality agreement.
Yeah.
So if someone comes to me with counseling, I'll tell them. If I have to go to the police, I'm going to the police. If I need to submit
Right.
to a counselor, I'm going to send you to a counselor. And just, I'm not going to share this out in the open, but I don't hide anything from my wife. And I usually make that very clear up front.
Yeah.
And
I
I
don't
do
think
as
this is
well.
a matter of, I don't think this is a matter of hiding something from your wife. I think this is a matter of protecting her in the sense of not expecting her to know everything.
Yeah.
Then not holding her accountable to know everything, which is hugely important, because there are some things that happen in ministry that honestly your wife just doesn't need to know.
That's true.
I mean, if there is somebody in your ministry who is struggling with the pornography addiction, my wife doesn't need to know that.
No.
I can know that as his pastor, but I'm not going to share that with my wife. And so that's one of those things. The other thing too is I see a lot of young guys that if a situation is not going right in church, and maybe the church is being a little bit mean to them or whatnot, he can vent that frustration out on his wife. And I think that's a very dangerous thing as well. I think we have to protect our relationships with our wives and our children a little more than what we do at times by just guarding them in that.
And we need to, in that, guard their relationship with the church as well, right? And so it's not just protecting them from your relationship with the church, but in a lot of ways you have to guard the purity of their relationship with the church. Because again, like Sean said, if the expectation is the same for our wives as it is for any other member of the church in that stage of life, then we are, as their pastor, responsible to guard that and to shepherd that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let's move on to another question here. How do you function, or how do you balance marriage and ministry together during the week? Do you take a family day during the week? Do you take a certain time off? What does that look like for you and your ministry?
Recently, the best way that we began to balance between ministry and family life is we really take time to pray together. That's together, right? It's not just that we pray for each other. That goes on a lot, but we take time at the end of the day to pray together. So that helps to have a balance between, okay, we can openly pray to God about the things that are bothering us in ministry or otherwise. But on top of that, then we also have decided that, we would have a day during the week where I would take some of the burden of the children, of raising our young kids, because that's difficult to do every day of the week. So on Fridays, our typical practice right now is that I'm the first one up. I make breakfast, I bring it to her, and she gets to stay in bed. Now, usually we still have a baby, so she's got to feed the baby, and she's there with him. But for the most part, that morning period, which is, from the moment our kids start running around, which varies on time between 6:30 and 7:30 to about 10, is just me. I am running everything so that she has a morning off.
Wow. Okay, so you're doing this more on a daily basis. You're just kind of playing tag team.
Yeah. So that's Friday. That's that. Other days.
Okay, that's just Friday.
The one, first one up, Monday through Thursday. Yeah. So Friday is the morning time for her to get a time off in the morning to have a slower start to her morning. That's my day to take care of things. Okay. In general, there's always exceptions.
David, what do you think, man? What have you done?
I'm a little bit in a unique position because I haven't had an 8 to 5 church staff position for a dozen years or so. It's 10 years or so. So, and most of my pastoral experience has been in a church plant setting or in a small church setting. And so where I'm the only guy, right? Or we don't have an office. We work from home, work mobile. So the result of that is my wife and I's understanding is that I have to have some flexibility to be available in ministry, but that also works the other way around, where I try to have flexibility to be available to her. We do, we take Saturdays as kind of the family day. But outside of that, it's really more about bending and flexing than it is scheduling anything. If you have to schedule something, schedule it, but it has much more to do with bending and flexing and being willing to give here and take there. My experience in ministry has been, for years they talked about their concern that pastors were sacrificing their families on the altar of the church for the sake of their ministry. That hasn't been the imbalance I've seen in the last 10 years or so. Mm-hmm. The imbalance I've seen more often are guys that are, frankly, coming really close to making their families the idol and making ministry just the job. I get it. I get the importance of the family. Don't hear me. But it is a distinctive, special calling to serve in ministry. Which is one of the reasons why I think that feeds into my answer. I think we need to bend and flex and be flexible, because I personally think that the day that we stop feeling guilty for neglecting one for the sake of the other is the day that we're officially out of balance. It's that constant back and forth that I think does create that balance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. The pastor should have this tension of going, like, when he's out of the office or when he's out of fellowship with his people, he should have a tension of going, like, why am I not involved there? But at the same time, when he's in that ministry role or when he's in that position, he should also be looking at his family going, okay, I know they need my attention too. There has to be this structured balance.
Yeah. I don't know that finding that sweet spot ever happens. I think that's part of it. I don't know. What do you think?
The only way that I figured out this balance like that is to just become incredibly structured with it. I mean, that's been, over my ministry, that's kind of where I work to. Now, there is still some flexibility. Like yesterday, my wife called me. She's a school teacher, and she was like, hey, I'm heading to this restaurant. Do you want to come and have lunch with me or whatnot? And so we went and we had a 20-minute lunch together, and that was cool. That was super flexible, super spontaneous, and that happens sometimes. And it's just God's blessing in an essence. But at other times, actually on a weekly basis, what I try and do is I try and block off Fridays. Fridays are family Fridays for me. And so that is the day that I spend with my kids. That is the day that we go and do something once my wife gets off work, and we go do something fun. So we'll go to the movies, or we'll go bowling, or we'll go whatever, do whatever we got to do. And so to really invest in our families and things like that, that's kind of what I've done in order to just kind of avoid that tension. Because what I found is that if I'm too flexible and I'm spending time with my family, I'm not really spending time with my family. I'm thinking about the church.
Right.
And then when I'm with the church, I'm not really fully focused on what's going on there. I'm thinking about my family. And so it was just like this thing. It just didn't work out for me. So I had to really block out that time. And Fridays are that time where if something comes up, either one of my associate pastors or one of my deacons handles it for me. I just say, look, I'm working with family, and this is where I am.
I think that's a helpful note for our listeners, and it's certainly a help for us. When we talk about flexibility only works in the context of structure. Flexibility without structure is formless, right? And so having a structure to be able to bend and flex with, that's the benefit.
So the idea is your marriages and your personality type are going to vary, but you need to have some sort of structure in place that everyone knows this is the basic, and we can bend and sway within that, but this is what it's supposed to be the norm.